All right, guys, factoring by grouping. Okay, we have two more factoring lessons left. This is one of them, okay? And so we have one more after this. So factoring by grouping. What we're going to do here is we're going to factor it in groups of two. So let's jump right in. So we're going to go ahead and I like to call them little boats. Okay, so we're going to draw a little boat under the first two and a little boat under the last two. And the purpose here is to factor in groups of two because notice here they have nothing in common all the way across. So when we have four terms, we can check to see if we can factor by grouping. And let's go ahead and begin. So let's factor out this group here. X to the third minus 3x squared. What do they have in common here? Well, it looks like they both have x's in common. And they each have at least two x's. So I'm going to go ahead and factor out an x squared here. Okay, so since I'm factoring out an x squared, that means I'm going to be left with something inside the parentheses. So let's go ahead and see what we have left. So x squared, to get to x cubed, I need to multiply by one more x, so that'll be x. And then here I have a negative 3x squared, I just need a negative 3 there. So x minus 3. Notice here if I distribute this, x squared times x, I get x cubed. X squared times negative 3 is negative 3x squared. Exactly what I want. Now let's factor the second group here. Now, if it begins with a negative, then we must factor out a negative here, okay? We must. Okay, so now let's see what's left here. 16x and 48. So between 16 and 48, I see here that 16 goes into 48 3 times. So I can factor out a 16. Okay? And so what is left? Well, I already have a negative 16 here. I just need an x, so that's negative 16 times x is negative 16x. So I need to multiply this by a negative because a negative 16 times another negative will give me a positive 48. So what number is that? Well, just take your 48 divided by 16, see how many times it goes in. That's 3. So minus 3. Okay, now we're not done yet. So notice here again, all I did was I factored out in groups of 2, and I have what I factored out on the outside and what is left on the inside. Notice here how these two match. If they match, then you can factor by grouping. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and put the x minus 3 into a single parentheses, okay? And what we're going to do over here is we're going to write one more parentheses, and we're going to put whatever was on the outside inside together, like this, x squared minus 16. Now you may be wondering why, if there are two x minus 3's, why did you write it only once? Well, this is why, because notice here, we're taking the x squared and the minus 16, and we're going to multiply it by the x minus 3, so this is one way to write it. So notice here, if I were to distribute here x squared times x, that's the same as this one, x squared times x. X squared times negative 3 is right there, x squared times negative 3. So that takes care of the first factoring that I did here. Now take a look at the negative 16. Negative 16 times x, that's right here. And then negative 16 times negative 3 is also there. So notice by writing it like this as two binomials being multiplied, it's the same as writing it like this separately. Okay? All I'm doing here is I'm distributing the x squared and I'm distributing the negative 16. That's exactly what you're doing here when you do this. Okay? Now notice here, I have x squared minus 16. This should look familiar to you. This is a difference of squares. So that means we're not done factoring yet. That means that this will generate two more factors. So the x minus 3 is going to be unchanged, but the x squared minus 16, that could become x times x, right, for x squared, and then the negative 16 is going to be negative 4 times positive 4. And so this would be my final answer. Now, it's not always going to turn out this way, but you always have to be prepared in case it does. Okay? Let's do another one. So, Group them with the first two and then the last two. And then let's go ahead and factor. Again, we have x cubed and x squared, so let's go ahead and factor an x squared out. That's all they have in common. And so what's left? I'm left with x plus 7. Notice if you distribute x squared times x, you get x cubed. X squared times 7 is 7x squared. Okay. Again, remember, if you have a negative at the beginning of the next two, you got to factor out a negative. What about 9 and 63? What do they have in common? Well, a 9. Okay, so let's go ahead and factor out a 9. And so we have negative 9 times what is 9x. So we need an x there. Negative 9 times x is negative 9x, which is what we have here. Now here I need a negative 63. So a negative times a positive is going to be a negative there. So I have negative 9 times 7. And so notice here, these two match. And when you're factoring by grouping, they will match, okay, if it's factorable. So for example, if I had an x minus 7 here, it would not be correct. And so let's go ahead and put the x squared minus 9 into their own parentheses, and then the x plus 7 into one single parentheses. I already explained above why we only write it once. Okay, but notice here, this one here is again a difference of squares. So let's go ahead and factor that. So it's going to be x times x, and then negative 3 times positive 3. And then just bring down the x plus 7. So go ahead and just group them. So we have here, notice here, 3m to the third minus m squared. Again, the only thing they have in common is m squared. So let's put a parentheses here. And let's see what are we left with here. We're left with a 3m on the first one. Minus, now notice here, m squared times what will give me negative m squared? Well, it's the same number here, the same expression, m squared. So all I need to do is put a 1 there. That way when I multiply m squared times negative 1, I get negative m squared. Okay, what about here? Okay, what do they have in common? Well, 9 and 3 both have 3 in common. Now it starts with a positive, so I'm going to go ahead and put a positive there, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and factor out a 3. Now, my hope is that this is repeated inside here, okay? So let's try it. Let's just go ahead and put it in there, 3m minus 1. Let's see if it works. What's 3 times 3m? Is it 9m? Yes, it is. What's 3 times negative 1? Is it negative 3? Yes, it is. So that's the correct factorization there. Again, we're going to go ahead and put the m squared plus 3 outside in their own parentheses. And then 3m minus 1 in their own parentheses as well. Okay, notice here we do not have a difference of squares, so that means we are finished. Last two. Okay, feel free to pause and try this one. These are a little harder. Okay, so notice here, 4c to the third plus 8c squared. I'm going to factor out a 4 here and a c squared. And so what's left? Well, we already have a 4 in the first term here, and we already have c squared. So all we need is just another c. And then 4c squared times what will give me 8c squared? Well, looks like I just need a 2 there, because 4 times 2 is 8, and then we already had the c squared. Look at this. We have a negative, so we're going to have to factor out a negative there. Okay, now 9 and 18, what do they have in common? Well, they have a 9. Now remember, we want these to match, so let's just write it in there and see if it works. Negative 9 times c, is it negative 9c? Yes. Negative 9 times positive 2, is that negative 18? Yes. So go ahead and put the ones on the outside in their own parentheses, and then this one in a single parentheses. What do you have here? A difference of squares again. Okay, so this is going to be 2c times 2c, and then that's going to be positive 3 times negative 3. And then you just bring down the c plus 2. Last one, try it if you want. Let's group this one here and there. So notice here these are all variables and with a single number at the end. And so we have x squared. Let's see what we end up with here. We have a x plus 1, because notice here if I distribute x squared times x, I get x cubed. X squared times 1 is x squared. Here I have a positive, so it's just going to be positive there. Now what can I factor out here? They have nothing in common. Nothing. Well, when they have nothing in common, it really means they have nothing in common other than 1. So that means we can factor out a 1. Okay? Everything always has 1 in common. And so we have here x plus 1. If I multiply 1 times x, I get 1x, or just x. And 1 times 1 is 1. Okay? Notice the parentheses match, so I have x squared plus 1. The ones on the outside go inside together. And then I just write my answer for the last one there. And that's it. That's my answer. This is not a difference of squares because that's plus. If it were x squared minus 1, then yes. But since it's x squared plus 1, I leave it like this.